Good morning, New Heart family and friends. This is Elder Solomon coming to you this week with our Sunday school lesson. We hope and pray that God has truly been blessing you, and we know for a fact that He's been blessing you because you are still here. You're still able to live and you're able to move. And God has truly seen us through some troubled times. And it's not because of anything that we have done, but it's because He promised to take care of us. And we just thank God this morning for continuing to do what He has promised to do for us. And we're coming this morning to uh, go over our Sunday school lesson. Our Sunday school lesson this week is entitled Nehemiah Combats Derision and Danger. Our scripture reference this morning is Nehemiah chapter number 4, verses 1 through 9. Our golden text is Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 9. We're going to go ahead and read that. Uh, it says, Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. That was Nehemiah letting us know that his answer to the danger and the problems that he faced was prayer. And many times we look for answers to our problems and we try to figure things out on our own. But one of the things that we should always remember and consider is that prayer is the answer for everything. No matter what you're going through, I know somebody say, well, if I need, money, I need to go to the loan company. Well, you might go to the loan company, but instead of going to the loan company, you ought to go on your knees and pray. You ought to ask God to help you to make your ends meet, and God will do just that. And so many times we look for answers, like I said, but the answer is prayer. And so as we discuss this lesson this week, let us understand what Nehemiah is going through. Some background here is that Nehemiah and the other Jews are in Babylonian captivity. They have been in captivity for um, a lot of years, but Nehemiah's heart is in Jerusalem. He still has a soft space in his heart for his homeland. He has found out that Jerusalem is in ruins. It has been burned and everything has been destroyed, and there has been no one to rebuild. And when you really, really care about where you come from, and you don't forget about where you come from, you still have a place in your heart for your old stomping grounds. And so Nehemiah has a desire to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall. Nehemiah has a position in the office of King Artaxerxes. He's the cupbearer. So he is the person that holds the king's cup. He has a high position and he's able to serve in the capacity because God gives him the favor to do so. And a little background on that is that one day the king noticed that Nehemiah was not his normal cheerful self. He's not smiling. He's not showing that he's happy to serve. And the king notices that there's been a mood change. And when he asks what the problem is, Nehemiah lets him know that while I'm here serving you, my heart is hurt. I'm troubled by what I'm hearing about Jerusalem. And I would like to go back and be able to fix the wall. I want to go back and rebuild my homeland. And so, because he's been such a good servant and God's favor has been upon him, the king allows him to go back. And we must understand that uh, Nehemiah uses his position not only to serve the king, but to keep himself in a place where he can find favor. I came this morning to let you know that sometimes you're going to go through some things, but if you keep yourself in the right position, even though you're not where you want to be, God's favor can help you out of any situation that you're in. And so Nehemiah gets the opportunity to go back home because he has the permission of the king. Then, after he gets permission from the king, he asks for a few more things. The next thing he asks the king for, after he gets his permission to go, he asks the king to allow him to have the things that he needs to rebuild the wall because Nehemiah needed materials. He might have had the manpower, but he needed the materials to build the wall. And so he asked the king for the materials, and the king gave him the materials. So he asked first for permission. Now he's asked for provisions. I got your permission to go, but now I need something to work with. And so the king gives him what he needs to work with. And then the third thing he asks for is protection. Because Nehemiah already knows that as he travels back to Jerusalem, he's going to have to go through some lands and deal with some people who will not be in favor of the work of God, but with the king's approval, they cannot stop the progress of God. See, sometimes we have enemies and have folks that's in our way that want to hinder us, but when we've got the protection that comes with serving God, they can do everything except stop you. That's why Paul asked the question, what shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? Now, that's Romans 8 and 31. And I promise you that of all of the questions that have ever been asked, that's the one that has the simplest answer. If God be for us, who can be against us? Nobody. Who can stop us? Nobody. So we must understand that Nehemiah goes back home to take care of this homeland situation. He wants to secure the homeland, homeland security in the Bible times. And so we find that he goes to do these things, but just like always, what happens when you're trying to do something for God? You got enemies. You got folks who you're not even bothering, but they don't want to see the work of God done, and they definitely don't want to see it done through you. But Nehemiah has the people, and they are prepared to do the work that's set before them. And I want you to understand that in this walk of life, we don't walk alone. God walks with us, He talks with us, and He lets us know that we all belong to each other. But there may be some days where it seems like your enemies are numerous. And one point I want to drive home is that I don't want you to underestimate the enemy. Understand how powerful the enemy is, but while you're considering that, also consider that it's the God that you serve that allows you to be able to overcome. So, yes, we know we have enemies. We know that they're going to uh, crowd around us, and we know that they're going to encamp around us and try to stop us. But I read that when the enemy comes in like a flood, when they come from all different directions, God will lift up a standard against them. That means God will protect you. He will stand up. He will fortify you so that you can see your enemies and they can get close to you, but they can't do anything to you. And that's the one thing that we have to stick a pin in and know that no matter what happens against us, no matter what weapon is formed against us, it won't prosper. See, there's somebody that is confused about that because they get upset when the weapons form. But I'm not concerned about the weapons forming because I realize that there are going to be some things that I have to go through. There are going to be some things you're going to have to go through. The weapons are going to form, but rest assured they won't prosper. And so when we look at verse number 1 here, we realize that Nehemiah has an issue with his enemies who he has done nothing to. And so verse number 1 says, but it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. In other words, when his enemies found out that the wall was being rebuilt, he got mad. How many times in our lives Have we had folks to get mad with us just because we were minding our business, just because we were doing what God told us to do, just because we were being blessed for being obedient? We weren't bothering anybody, but they were mad anyway. You can't stop your enemies from being upset. As a matter of fact, that is the job of the enemy, to steal, kill, and destroy. He wants to stop you from doing what you need to do, and he will ridicule you in order to get that done. That's why the lesson says that Nehemiah combats derision and danger. Before the danger comes, the derision comes. Now, Webster defines derision as ridicule, scorn, words that are spoken to destroy, to break down. That's that criticism that comes from those who are upset about what you're doing for God. And so now, one thing I want you to understand is that if the derision and the ridicule came in the Bible times to Nehemiah, when it came to other people, even when it came to Jesus Christ, we must understand that that is a part of what we got to go through. That's why the Bible tells us to endure hardness as good soldiers. There are going to be some times where people are going to ridicule you. They're going to talk about you. They're going to say it don't take all that. They're going to say, I don't understand why they're doing this or why they feel like they are qualified to do this. You're qualified because God said you're qualified. You're qualified to do the job that God has called for you to do because God has given you the directions and the instructions. And I promise you that even though you will have folks talking about you, if you do what God says, you'll find that the work that God sets before you will be quite easy for you to do. And so in verse number 1, he gets upset and he mocks them. He talks down about them. And not only does he thinking in his heart and his mind, he speaks against God out of his mouth in the company of his friends. He begins to talk about the Jews because you remember that the Jews are in captivity. They've been captured. They've been servants in Babylon for all of these years. And so they're seen as weak. But see, God allowed them to go into captivity for some of the things that they had done against God. And God allowed them to see what it was like again to be oppressed. Now, for me, I truly believe that if I had read the history books and I had seen what God had allowed my forefathers and my ancestors to go through in Egypt, once I crossed the Red Sea, you wouldn't have to worry about me being captive anymore, because once I've seen that it has happened to them, that would be one case where experience would not be the best teacher, because I don't have to see God's destruction to know what will happen when you're disobedient. Nevertheless, they're on this spin cycle of rebellion, destruction, and then restoration. And right now, they're on the way to restoration, but they are in captivity. And so Sanballat says what he says against them. And the Bible does not give us a lot of information on Sanballat other than to speak about him in these ways and let us know that he was an enemy of the Jews. But we have to understand that the enemies that we face will not do anything to us. They cannot overcome us when God has spoken and has given us the victory. And many times we have to understand that because we have the victory, what happens in between the start of the battle and the end of it, none of that is important. That's irrelevant. Don't even worry about what happens. Just know that the end result is victory. And if God gives you the victory, then that means God is going to fight your battles. See, somebody this morning needs to understand that the victory is at the end of the battle. But see, what you got to do is let the battle be fought until the end, and you just sit there and do what God tells you to do, and all the while you winning. You may get knocked down, you may be hurt, you may be seem like hit from every side, you may even fall down. But in order for you to get the victory, You got to take those wounds, take tape those bandages on. You got to keep your mind on Jesus and know that if you stick it out, the victory is coming. Many people have lost the battles because they couldn't stand the injuries that they fought, that they encountered on the way to the victory. But we must understand that the victory is at hand. God has already determined you to be the winner, but you can't win until you get to the end of the battle. And so Sanballat says what he says about them and mocked them and was upset. And verse number 2 says, and he spake before his brethren in the army of Samaria and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Sanballat asks several questions here. Who do these Jews think they are? They're weak. They're feeble. They don't have the power to do what they think they can do. See, and we must understand that folks can call you whatever they want. Your enemy can think whatever he wants to think about you. But one thing he can't do, if you got your mind made up to do what God says to do, he can talk as much as he wants to, but he can't overcome you. I don't know why God is continuing to bring that to my mind this morning, but I want you to understand that if you do what God says to do, the enemy can't do anything to overcome you. He can fight you all day and night. He can speak what he wants to speak. He can take whatever actions God allows him to take. But one thing he can't do when you got your mind made up is defeat you. I wish somebody out there in Sunday school would say, I will not be defeated. I cannot lose because God is on my side. And so he says, these feeble Jews, how are they going to protect themselves? How can they fortify themselves? Are they going to be able to build the wall and watch their backs at the same time? Do they think that this is a process that's going to be over in a day? Do they think they're going to be able to hurry up and do this? Do they think that their burnt offerings and their sacrifice to God is going to be enough? And look at these stones that they got to use. These materials they got, not enough for them to do the job. That's all the things that your enemy will say. The enemy will ask you, will put it in front of you. Who do you think you are? How are you going to do this? Do you think what you've got is enough for you to get the job done? And your answer should undoubtedly be yes. I am a child of God. God will protect me. God gave me the materials. God gave me the permission, and God will see me through. Don't let what the enemy asks about you and what he says about you stop you from doing what God said to do. Because that's his job, is to stop you, but it's your job to ignore the words of the enemy and remember what God has said. And so we move on to verse number 3. Verse 3 says, now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they built, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Now, Tobiah was just one of those people who was a friend of Sanballat. And undoubtedly, he was in the crowd when Sanballat was saying what he said about the Jews, what he was saying about the children of God. And Tobiah wanted to jump in on the party. These two individuals really have no reason to hate on the Jews. They have no reason to feel like the Jews are a threat to them, but yet and still, while the Jews are doing the work of God, they're on the sidelines running their mouths. And Tobiah just jumps in because the conversation is going well. It feels good. Sanballat and Tobiah get together. They began to talk, and this is a true indication of when birds of a feather flock together. They both had the same ideas. They both wanted to talk down about the children of God. But that is where the danger was for them, talking down the children of God and talking down upon God. Do you realize that when the enemy strikes out against you, that it's not about you? Do you realize that when the enemy does something to you, he's not really doing it to you? You're experiencing it, but if you are a child of God, every foul word that comes from the enemy is against God. Every action that's taken against you is against God. And so, since it's not about you per se, sometimes you've got to endure some things that you feel like you don't deserve. That's a part of the process. If you want to be a child of God, if you're going to call yourself a child of God, set yourself up to know that there are going to be some times where things are going to be said. Sometimes things are going to be done, and you're going to be trying to figure out why this happened to me because I didn't say anything, I didn't do anything, I wasn't bothering anybody. Your attacks sometimes just come because you're serving God. But if you are serving God and you're a soldier in the army, whether or not you feel like the attack is warranted, once you go into the army, you have to be ready to fight. You have to be ready to defend the faith. You have to be ready to defend yourself against the enemy. But God has already fought every battle and every victory has already been won. All you've got to do is just hold out and endure until the end. And so Tobiah jumps in and he begins to talk about them and said, these stones they got that they're using, a fox can run up and knock these stones down. They don't even have what they need to build this wall. They're not strong enough to do it. They don't have the know-how. They don't understand the task that they've undertaken. But guess what? While he was saying all these words, the children of God were laying the stones. While he was talking all these words, the foundation had already been laid. While he was saying all of these words, that wall was going up. And sometimes that's what you've got to do in the face of the enemy. While he's talking, keep working. While he's trying to tear you down with his words, keep working. While he continues to try to put obstacles in your way, keep working. Don't let the enemy stop you from doing anything that God has called for you to do. And so we find that Tobiah is saying these words because he is against God. He's not even concerned really about Nehemiah per se. He's speaking against God. And so verse number 4 is when Nehemiah begins to talk to God. That's when he begins to talk to God. And that's the lesson there is that when the enemy attacks you, you don't have to speak to the enemy. When the devil does something against you, you don't have to speak to the devil. You talk to God because God is the one that's going to handle your enemies. You don't have to have no ill will towards your enemies. You don't have to worry about anything that your enemies are saying and doing. When your enemies attack you, don't retaliate against them, but go to God in prayer. And so, verse number 4, he says, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the hand of captivity." Now, Nehemiah begins to pray to God, God, hear us, oh, our God. See, he didn't just say God, he said our God. He was letting God know that not only was he accepted him as his God, but he was speaking on behalf of all of the Jews. And he said, our God, we're despised. In other words, God, they're hating on us. God, they're talking bad about us. We're not bothering anybody, but we're doing your work, and they're continuing to talk. God, hear us as we speak to you about what they're doing and allow us to be able to overcome what they're doing by flipping everything that they're saying about us. Lord, turn it around on them. Now, I know some of y'all are going to say, but the New Testament says that we are to love our enemies and pray for them that despitefully use us. Yes, the scripture does say that. But what you must understand is that the way Nehemiah addresses his prayer, he's asking God to avenge himself. Nehemiah knows this is not about him. He knows this is not about the people that are building the wall. Nehemiah realizes that this is all about them speaking against God. And so he's asking God, God, avenge yourself. See, a lot of times when we go to God for our enemies, we going to God on our behalf. You can't do that. Don't go to God on your behalf. Go as a child of God. And if the things that are being done are done against God, then you ask God to avenge himself. I will never ask God to avenge me. You know why? Because the Bible already tells me that vengeance is mine, said the Lord. If anybody needs to be avenged, it's God. It's not me. Because that's part of what I have to do. That's part of what you have to do. You have to go through life and go through the things that you must go through, but let God avenge himself. And so Nehemiah says, God, avenge yourself. We're despised. They're mocking us. They're talking about us. They're saying things that are not true about us. But while they're talking about us, God, what they're really doing is talking about you. Every bad word, every bad deed, every bad thing that they try to do, God, they're not really doing it to me. They're doing it to you. And guess what happens? I'm going to help somebody right here because I want you to understand that even if you feel like the attack on you is personal, even if you feel like they're just doing it to you, believe me, you're not by yourself. And if we're going to be like Jesus, we have to handle our enemies the same way Jesus handled his. And he told us in the word that remember everything that they do unto you. Jesus said, remember that they did it to me first. So everything that the enemy does to you, don't take it personal. It has happened before. But if you want to be successful, you got to handle it the way Jesus did. You can't be talking back. You can't be fighting back. You can't be getting revenge. You got to love them. You got to pray for them. And you got to move forward in spite of what they're doing. I know that's not popular for some people, but that's just the God honest truth. You got to overlook so that you can overcome. I'm going to say that again. You got to overlook so that you can overcome. Don't worry about what the enemy is doing. If you want to overcome, overlook them and keep your eyes on God. So, moving on so that we can get this done. Verse number 5 says, and cover not their iniquity, let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. That's where the difference is in praying a prayer of revenge for your own sake. Nehemiah points out in verse number 5 that God, they're doing this against you. They're not doing this against us. They've provoked you. God, they're talking bad about you. God, they're going against what you said. So that's what we have to do. When you pray for that's how you pray for your enemies. That's how you show love to them that despitefully use you. God, they're not doing it to me. God, they're doing it to you. But Lord, I would like for you to help me with my enemies. Sometimes that's what you got to do. You just got to look up and say, God, help me with my enemies. And so that's what happens in verse number 5. Verse number 6 is very important. So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. That's the key to getting stuff done for God. You got to have your mind made up to do whatever you got to do, overcome whatever you got to overcome, overlook whatever you got to overlook, and do the work. Get your mind right. And once you get your mind right, God will do the rest. If you have your mind stayed on him, the Bible says he'll keep you in perfect peace. Why you think Nehemiah wasn't worried about what they were saying while they were building the wall? Because he kept his mind on Jesus. And he was at peace, building the wall. They're steadily talking about how weak the Jews are, but they had strength in numbers. They're talking about how bad those stones were, but them stones were rebuilding the wall. They were saying it couldn't be done, but while they were saying it couldn't be done, the people had their mind on doing the job. And if you keep your mind on doing what God told you to do, you won't worry about what folks are talking about. They can keep talking while I work. And while they're talking about me, I'm going to be doing like the old nursery rhyme says, I'm going to be whistling while I work. I'm going to be telling God, thank you for allowing me to continue to do the work that you've put to my hands. Verse number 7 says, but it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, that they were very wroth. Verse number 7. The enemies have multiplied. See, at first we were just talking about Sanballat and Tobiah, but in verse number 7, there are more enemies. But your enemies realize something that sometimes we fail to realize. They began to realize that the words that they spoke was not stopping God. Sometimes we fail to do what God told us to do because we worry about what they're saying. But in verse number 7, they realized that their words did not work. They realized that while they were saying all of those negative things, that the work kept going. Get it in your mind that no matter what the enemy says or does, he cannot stop the work of God. If God put it in your heart, in your mind to do it, and he's given your hands the ability, do everything you can toward God with all your might, and don't worry about your enemies. Because one day your enemies are going to become your footstools. But while you are waiting, continue to do the work of God. Verse number 8 says, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Once they realized that their words were falling on deaf ears, once they realized that the things that they wanted to do and say was not working, they got ready to fight. So Nehemiah says now they've all conspired, they come up with a plan. Because they couldn't stop us with their mouth, they're coming with their weapons. But verse number 9, he says, nevertheless, we made our prayer unto God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. Now, they came in verse number 8 to fight and to stop the work. But Nehemiah says, we're not going to stop the work. All we're going to do is have somebody watching out for us while we work. Watch our backs while we work. Don't let the devil make you take down because he poses a physical threat. A physical threat is nothing but that, a threat. And you know, sometimes we say in the world outside the church, you know, that's I'm not worried about threats. Or when you tell somebody something, you say that's not a threat, that's a promise. Okay, so the enemy bought a threat, but you got a promise, because he promised never to leave you or forsake you. And since he has made his promises to you, don't allow what the enemy says to you or about you stop you from doing the work of God. This week's lesson has several things in it that we need to remember. But the main thing is that even when you are ridiculed and when you're talked about, keep your mind on God. And even when they pose danger, remember that God promised to be your strong tower of protection. There's nothing too hard for God to do, and the enemy can do nothing to you except God allow it. I hope that we've said something this week that helps you out. Our lesson this week, Nehemiah combats derision and danger. But I want to leave you with this thought. It doesn't matter what the enemy says as long as you continue to do what God has called you to do. God bless you and God keep you is our prayer, and may heaven continue to smile upon you. God bless you.